And the recording is on.
It looks like it looks like all the attendees are probably in the room at this point.
Okay. Chair Nicholls, shall I begin?
Please do.
Good evening. Welcome to the February 8th, 2023 meeting of the Land Use Committee of the Lower Russian River MAC. My name is Debbie Ramirez, and I'm acting as clerk of the board for the Land Use Committee for today's meeting. Prior to Chair Nicholls commencing the meeting, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. Committee members, in order to prevent crosstalk or feedback, please mute your microphones until it is your turn to speak. The chair will use a roll call method to allow each member to have a clear turn to speak on each item. I will use roll call vote for any motions or other items that require a vote of the committee. As stated on the meeting agenda, we are accepting written comments for all public comment. You may submit written comments via email to debbie.ramirez@sonoma-county.org. And that is in the chat window if you need that. This includes any public comments on items not on the agenda. Written comments received prior to the public comment period for the agenda item you wish to comment on will be read into the record. If a comment is received after the agenda item is heard, but before the close of the meeting, the comment will still be included as part of the record of the meeting, but will not be read into the record. If you are joining us from Zoom and you would like to submit a public comment, please raise your hand on the application or on your phone by dialing *9 during the public comment periods. You will then be unmuted for your public comment. If you have technical issues, please contact me directly by email at Debbie, DEBBIE, Ramirez, RAMIREZ, @sonoma-county.org to note that you would like to make public comment so that you may be recognized. The chat message feature will be disabled to assure that there are no side conversations and to allow the committee to focus on the meeting as if it were an in-person committee meeting to further ensure compliance with the Brown Act. For detailed public comment instructions, please reference the meeting agenda or contact me directly. Finally, if a member needs to leave the meeting early, I would ask that you notify me for recording in the minutes. I will now turn the meeting over to Chair Nicholls.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez. Introductory remarks. I'd like to make it clear for the record that this meeting is being conducted by teleconference pursuant to the Brown Act waivers provided for under AB 361 in response to the COVID-19 state of emergency. The agenda states that the public may listen and provide written and verbal public comment on the agenda. I will now call the meeting to order by asking the clerk to conduct a roll call vote of committee members present.
Chair Mike Nicholls.
Present.
Herman Hernandez is not present. He notified us. Joe Rogoff.
Present.
Lisa Nominson.
Present.
And Patty Thayer. You're muted.
Sorry, present.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please present the flag. Debbie.
I am pulling up the
Okay,
flag. I'm sorry.
no problem.
Why am I having a challenge with the flag? I just practiced it. I'm sorry. It's not coming up now.
Debbie, I can try. I think I have one from the web. Hold on one
Okay.
moment.
I'll keep working on it. I just practiced it. Maybe it needs to be open before I,
Here we go.
oh, you got it. Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item of business is the approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to accept the agenda as stated? I turn to staff to ask for public comment.
So moved.
It's been moved. Do we have a second for the
Second,
agenda? Patty, you seconded it? Thank you.
yes.
Appreciate that. Now public comment. Do you show, Debbie, do you show any public comment on this?
I am not seeing any public comment, no hands raised. Oh, I have a hand raised,
Okay,
2 hands raised.
very
Okay.
good.
This is for public comment on approval of the agenda. Bryce. Please unmute.
Oh, I apologize. It was, my public comment is on land use. I misraised my hand. I'll lower it.
All right. Debbie, you had one other hand raised.
I think that hand went down as well.
That-
so they must
okay,
have had
very
the same
good.
time.
So it's been moved and seconded that we approve the agenda as written. Debbie, would you please do the roll call vote?
Chair Mike Nichols,
Yes,
Joe Rogoff,
Yes.
Lisa Nominson,
Yes.
and Patty Thayer.
Yes.
the motion passes. Next item is statement of conflict of interest. At this time, are there any committee members who have conflicts of interest in this evening's business? If so, please state so now. Not hearing any, we'll move on to the next item, correspondence. Has the county received any correspondence since our last meeting directed to the land use committee? Staff, can you respond? Do we have any?
None.
No correspondence?
No.
Very good, thank you. Consent calendar. Now that the meeting is called order, I'll move on to the February 9th consent calendar. As a reminder, the committee will be voting on all the items on the consent calendar as a single item. We only have one item on the consent calendar this evening. If you have a brief question about a particular item, staff can address it. However, if you'd like to discuss any of the items in greater detail, I would ask that a member request that the item be pulled off the consent calendar. Do any members wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Hearing none. Before entertaining a motion, may I ask the clerk to open up for public comment on this item?
I am not seeing any hands raised in the participants.
So, okay, seeing no
Oh,
hands.
now I do.
Okay,
I see one, Lisa.
Is that me?
No,
I
it's a-
just, oh, sorry.
if it's Lisa Herbert. Here we go.
What agenda item you're on that wasn't said? Are you on the land use for the housing element?
no, we're not. We're approving the agenda.
Okay. So that wasn't clarified.
I'm so sorry that We are in the process of approving the agenda. We'll get down to land use in just a moment, and we'll announce each of the agenda items and then open it up for public discussion on each of the agenda items as we get to them.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So seeing no hands raised, that concludes public comment on the item, and we need a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I just wanted to say something about the minutes, just said Pledge of Allegiance, Vesta. I didn't know if that was a typo and if it matters or not on the minutes.
I
To cross that off. I don't remember who did the pledge in November, but I don't-
believe that I did.
okay, all right. It's just
So
probably
we
typo.
can note that, correction. All
Okay.
right. Thank you very much for,
And then I would move to approve the minutes. If that's what we're up to.
do we have a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent calendar with the noted correction. Debbie, would you call a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Chair Mike Nicholls,
Yes.
Joe Rogoff,
Yes.
Lisa Nelmonson,
Yes.
and Patty Thayer.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. The first item to consider on our action item list is staff presentation. And I'm going to call on staff to make the presentation on item number 2 on the agenda regarding land use definition and an update on Moscow Road. Which staff member is going to make that presentation?
Hi, I'll dive in on this.
Very good, thank you.
We put in the land use definition here because it's important for people to understand the purpose of the land use committee. And that is, I'm pulling it up. Debbie, can you just read that definition out for me?
Yes. Land use is the term used to describe the management of land for beneficial use and the regulatory framework that prescribes permissible use.
So that's why we focus here on things that are being covered in Permit Sonoma and the rules and regulations around land use. But that being said, there have been a lot of requests for a quick update on Moscow Road, and so we'll give that, even though it's not particularly a land use focused topic. The MAC meeting, the full MAC meeting, to be held on Thursday, the 16th. At 5:30, from 5:30 to 7:30, is going to be covering the issues on Moscow Road. And at that meeting, we will have the roads team there. We will have Janice, who's the Deputy Director of Public Infrastructure in charge of roads. And we will also have Johannes Hoiverts, who is the Director of Public Infrastructure, and they'll be able to answer very specific questions. So we don't have them here tonight, but we will have them next week. So those of you that want to ask really detailed questions around safety or how the fix is going to happen or those sorts of things, that's the place to ask those questions. We also have a second meeting coming up, which hasn't been scheduled yet, but I'll let you know about that now, which is once the contractor has been hired, which is expected to go before the Board of Supervisors either in March or April. They're going to bring the contractor and the roads team and Linda all into the local area to have a local community meeting. So you'll be able once again to ask very specific questions about the fix that is planned, the engineering that is happening, the funding that is happening, and all of those pieces. At the moment, the roads department has stabilized the new slide. What they did is they, when it dried out enough, they put temporary paving all up against the inside area of the road in order to give more room for large vehicles to get past the new slide. They had the Duncan's Mills area open for a short time when the road was closed because of the new slide. That has been closed again because that area is still not safe. there has been some discussion around opening it up for specific purposes, and that's still under discussion, and you can ask about that directly with the roads team on the 16th. We do rely on the roads engineers to tell us what's safe and what's not. So we are getting a lot of comments on Facebook and email saying, I think this one's safer and not that one. And I appreciate that input. We appreciate that input. At the same time, the roads engineers really are the ones that have the expertise and the safety knowledge to know which one to keep open. So let's see, the Transportation and Public Works, which is now Public Infrastructure, has done some great work in terms of having the permitting process. They brought FEMA, they brought Sweetwater Springs, Cal OES, roads, and other players in to have a conversation at the site a few weeks back. Oh, Cal Fish and Wildlife, that's who we needed. And they were able to join the new slide under FEMA rules and Cal Fish and Wildlife rules to the permitting that has already been approved from the 2019 slide. So that has saved us at least a year, if not more, of permitting time for the new slide. So thank you very much, Public Infrastructure, for doing that. So the design of the new slide and the construction of the old slide have been put under one construction request for the Board of Supervisor, which is going in again, March or April. We don't have a definitive date on that. So the planned construction for the 2019 slide is not delayed. It will start in early summer, and that construction has been approved by FEMA. The funding has been approved by FEMA, and that will start early summer, just as was planned. The design for the new slide and the tie-in to the little one that's close by that they've been tied together is going to be approved at the same time. So the design will start going forward at the same time as the construction of the old slide. So really within, what has it been, under a month, they've accomplished a huge amount of moving this all forward, and they'll all be able to answer very specific questions next week. In the meantime, we understand this is scary and it's inconvenient, and your patience is appreciated because it has been a long slog. Working to get the FEMA funding through has been a full-time job. We have one roads engineer, Stephen Hunter, who has been on the FEMA case full-time since 2019. So it's been frustrating for all of us, and we appreciate how difficult this has been, and are working hard to fix it as best we can.
Thank you very much, Elise. What I'd like to do is bring this up for committee member comments first, and then we'll open it for public comment following the committee member comments. Committee member Rogoff, do you have any comments on this particular agenda item?
I do not.
Committee member Namanson, do you have any comments on this particular agenda item?
No, I don't. Thank you.
And committee member Thayer, comments?
Just very briefly, and I appreciate that this will be coming up at another meeting, so I'll be very brief, but the people I live with and talk with daily have real concerns about the fact that we do not have notice of when either section of the road is going to be open or closed, and it just sort of happens, and we don't know that it's going to happen, and that is fixable. Number two, there is still some concern about delaying the repair in the west because it's now been tied to the cave-in in the east. I understand your representation today that that's not going to happen, and that's fabulous. Thank you, thank you. And then finally, people are concerned once the repair starts in the west, is one or the other always going to be open, and will we know about it? Because that is the way we get to our homes. So thank you so much, and those are my comments.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. We'd like to open it up for public comment. Debbie, would you please open and invite any members of the public who wish to comment on the item?
Yes, at this time, I would like to invite any members of the public who wish to comment on this item to raise their hand. I will check my inbox for written comments. And I'd like to recognize attendee Andrea. I will now allow you to talk. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and begin your comment when you see the 2-minute timer. And I have to pull up the timer.
Can you hear me anyway?
We can hear you, but we're waiting for
Yes,
the
but
timer.
my timer is
I understand.
loading. I do not know why.
Debbie, perhaps it's because you're showing a vignette of your, there you go. Now your timer should work.
Okay.
While we're waiting, I would just comment to Patty's remarks. Yes, I absolutely agree with you, Patty. We have not had sufficient notice from public infrastructure on when one side opens and one side closes, and that needs to happen. And that needs to happen not only now, but also when the repairs are happening. And it's something I'll take up with public infrastructure first thing in the morning. I was thinking of it myself today. So,
Thanks
we're in
so much.
Thank you,
absolute
Elise.
agreement.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, Debbie, we
I will
ready to
begin
go?
the timer.
Very good. Okay, Andrea.
You may
Hey,
go.
everybody. Thank you for letting me comment. I live in Monte Rio, in the area that's been impacted by these slides on Moscow Road. And I know that Patty lives around here. I don't know who else does. I wanted you all to understand how much this impacts the people who live here. We've got slides on both sides of the major road that we use to get into this community. And the only other way to get in here is they're called terraces. They're these 1-lane windy roads that like a lot of people don't even feel comfortable driving on at all. So while I appreciate, the update that Elise gave and what the county is doing, and I feel like you're hearing our concerns, the other slide hasn't been fixed for 4 years. And we're extremely worried and want this, whole issue to be dealt with by the summer. Because in the summer, we're going to have all the people coming in for the tourist season and more people driving on this road. The new slide is actually, if you've driven out there, even after the current changes, it is scary to drive on there. And I wouldn't want to drive on there at night, and I wouldn't want to see somebody who's inebriating driving around there. So it's scary. I just urge you to make this happen and change the situation before summer, before tourist season, and before fire season, because this is the road that we need to use to evacuate if there is a fire. So I will definitely come to the meeting next week, but I just want you all to understand that, we're here, we want to squeeze into every meeting because this is just so difficult for this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Debbie, do you have any further comments on this agenda item?
I do not see any other hands raised. So seeing no hands raised, that concludes public comment on this item.
All right, this is, I mistakenly called this an action item. This is not really an action item. It was an informational item. So it does not require a motion to approve, but we can formally entertain a motion to advise the full MAC board that we have been presented the item and for the record have documented the committee member and public comments. So we have a motion on that, please.
I move that way. I so move.
Thank you, Lisa. May I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Joe. Staff, would you call the roll call vote, please?
Yes, Chair Nicholls,
Yes.
Joe Rogoff,
Yes.
Lisa Nominson,
Yes.
and Patty Thayer.
Thank you very much. Now we're on to an action item, update on permits and projects of interest. The first item is PLP 18-0012, the Lok Hotel Project, also known as the Guernewood Park Hotel Project. The initial study mitigated negative declaration will be recirculated for a second time on February 3rd through March 6th. This is due to the addition of mitigation measures required by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, as stated in the CDFW Commission CDFW letter dated November 29th, 2022, which was submitted in response to the first recirculation of the ISMMD dated November 2nd, 2022 through December 2nd, 2022. Due to applicant changes on the project. So there was something that came in after we printed our board packet. And basically what we have received from the county is the notice of intent to adopt a revised mitigated negative declaration. And the county did not find potential environmental impacts that could not be mitigated to a less than significant level. The ISMND is available at Permit Sonoma, and they are tentatively scheduled to hold a public hearing on March 23rd, 2023 to consider the adoption of the ISMND. The ISMND, and that is the most current information that I have on that particular item. So I'd like to open this up first to committee members, and then we'll open it up to the public. So for committee members, again, we'll go through a roll call. Joe, starting off with you. Do you have any comments on that particular item?
I do. I have some questions, and I don't know that I can get them answered here, but it's a large document, and I tried studying both the previous document and the current document to see, after it had been withdrawn and resubmitted, whether there were substantive changes between this one and the one we saw in November. I wasn't able to see any, but I wondered if anyone knew what had changed since it was withdrawn by Lok, the developer.
I am not familiar with any changes on that myself. I looked as well, and I think the only reason for the recirculation was the fact that Fish and Game wanted to weigh in, and then the county evaluated the concerns by Fish and Wildlife, and found that staff is going to move forward for public hearings, and then the meeting to move forward on the project, I guess, and the permitting, the next step.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of concerns that I'd like to share from having spoken with numerous neighbors. Most of them live across 116 off Old Casvero Road, Lovers Lane, on Old Monty Ree Road, and Guernewood Lane, and all of which feed right into 116, right there at the site. These folks have been evacuated numerous times, and it's been difficult then to get onto 116. They talk about summertime traffic with so many people going through Guerneville to the coast and people visiting the river, how much traffic there really is. The concern, the traffic study did not really take into consideration the intersections that they're most concerned with. They were focused on Mirabelle Road and Armstrong Woods Road. So, with the potential of 175 more cars going, it could be dangerously slow if everyone's evacuated at the same time. That's augmented by the potential of there being a meeting there. They're building meeting rooms with the capacity of 500 people. So, if the perfect storm were to occur and there was a fire when there was a meeting and these people were there, I think there's legitimate concern from the residents around there that it would be difficult and very dangerous to get out.
Thank you, Joe.
I have one other
Okay.
comment, and that is, I was curious with the meeting space. It didn't make sense to me, and this was echoed by other folks that I spoke with. There's a requirement of 1 parking space per 100 square feet, which means 35 parking spaces for the meeting rooms. Yet the capacity of the rooms is 500 people. That just doesn't make sense to me unless there's a requirement that people are delivered by public transportation. We know that scheduled public transportation is not very frequent. And so it would be surprising if many people who went to these meetings used it. I could see if there were dedicated buses bringing people to the meeting that it might accommodate this kind of parking. But where are these 500 people going to park? So that's a question that I have that I just don't see entertained on the documents that I've read.
And I would suggest that if you have comments, put them in writing and submit them to BZA.
Have done. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Joe. Lisa, do you have any comments on this agenda item?
I just wanted to say that the comments are due, it looks like they must be received by March 6th at 5 p.m. From what this document says. You may have said that, but it's always worth stating again that folks have time to write in. And I think it's valid and helpful when people do write in. So I always encourage that. And also, do we know how the mitigation measures are actually monitored by the county? That's just a question that I have, and maybe it's not for this board, but when you look at all the mitigation measures that start on page 14 of the planner's report, there's a lot of impacted species and trees, et cetera. So I just think it's important that we know that schedule also, if the project gets approved.
Right. I reached out to the planner today, and she is on vacation until next week. So I cannot answer that question. I'm sorry. But that's certainly a valid question to ask. And we've noted it in the record. So does that conclude your comments?
Yeah, I'll look into that.
Okay.
Just for myself, and I can share that info maybe.
Very good.
Thank
That might be helpful if you we can look into that and then report out next week at the full MAC meeting if that subject comes up. Member Thayer, you have some comments.
Yes, I want to thank Joe. Had the same reaction. It's very hard when there's not a red line. You're going through and trying to figure out, has anything changed? And if not much has changed, then I think what I said at the prior meeting about my constituents' concerns remain. But I also want to point out that this focus on evacuation and traffic with this one project, I want to make sure that somebody's taking into account, we've got this housing element that's proposing to bring in 666 more people into Guerneville and different places. So these things have, they're interrelated, and I don't know if they're being taking each other into account. And I think that's very, very important.
Very good. Thank you.
Whether it's traffic or water or sewage, it's a big increase in a very small area that we need to take care of.
Thank you very much. All right, we'd like to open this up for public comment. At this time, Debbie, do we have public comment?
We do. We have 2 hands raised. I'd like to recognize attendee Robert Tucker. I will now allow you to talk. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and begin your comment.
Hi, how are y'all? Thanks for having me. I'm one of the people that lives on the hill across the street from the Lok Project. And I have a concern that is similar to many of my neighbors, but is a little bit different. It's about traffic. But my primary concern is not in the case of an emergency, but just a case of a normal day. There's no real safe way for people to walk from the area of the hotel to Guerneville proper. It's about a mile walk. It's a curvy road, broken pavement on the side, no real way. And so if you have, say, 500 people who want to, say, go out to dinner after they've gone to a meeting room, they have to drive. You're not going to get people to be able to walk into town, go get dinner, go have a drink. Besides making it, dangerous with extra traffic, there's also like incentivizing drinking and driving. And I have a question is it the county and state who's obligated to make that road safer with traffic control, either lights or stop signs? And fixing the shoulder to make it safe? Or is this something that the developer can be asked to contribute to? Because I think it should be addressed before we put anything of that scope in Guernewood Park. And that's my comment.
Thank you very much, Robert. Appreciate that. Debbie, you had another presenter?
We have 2 MAC representatives with their hands up.
May I urge the MAC representatives to hold off on their comments until we have a full MAC meeting next week. We want to remain in compliance with the Brown Act, and it would be more appropriate for them to make the comments at the full MAC meeting next week. Do we have any other public commenters?
We still have 1 MAC rep with the hand up.
I would ask that MAC member to reserve their comments until we have a full MAC committee member, MAC council meeting next week.
So there are no other hands raised.
Thank you.
And that concludes public comment on this item.
All right.
Mike, I did want to make sure you saw that Scott Orr does have his hand up. So if I don't know.
I see it now. Yes, I'm sorry. We missed that one.
I did not
If it's
see.
appropriate, he may be able to
Go
address.
ahead, Scott, I'm so sorry. I missed that.
No, that's okay. It's great to get the experience as just speaker during public comment. So I just wanted to offer a couple clarifications for a couple of the points raised. I believe Lisa brought up, how are the mitigations enforced? So when you look at any mitigated negative declaration, if they're a good one, every mitigation measure will have monitoring, which is essentially saying how after approval, the responsible agency will, make sure that that's implemented, because a mitigation that's never implemented is completely worthless. So those also get pulled over into conditions of approval. So just, if someone is looking at the conditions of approval for a project, but not the full, really long mitigated negative declaration, they should be in there too, just to make it easier. And then there was another comment regarding what's different since there's not a red line. And so the reason that it got recirculated again is Fish and Wildlife asked for 7 new mitigation measures relating to 6 biological species. So the staff incorporated that and circulated it again. So I just wanted to offer those quick points of clarification. Not ready to go full into that project today, but those are just two things that I was able to easily answer. So thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Scott. I appreciate that clarification, and I'm sure that the staff as well as committee members appreciate the guidance that you provided us there. I'd like to entertain a motion to, are there any further public commenters?
No.
Very good.
Mike, would you like to just address, so Cynthia Strucker can't be at the next MAC meeting. She's out of town and she was hoping to comment now. To me, it seems like perhaps she should put her comments in writing. Will you explain to people your understanding of why having her speak would be putting it out of compliance with the Brown Act?
Thank you. Yes, but we have to be mindful of not having a majority of MAC members at a particular meeting. This is a committee meeting, and if we have more than a majority of or what would be considered a quorum attending a meeting, we create a problem for ourselves legally. So it's recommended that MAC members hold their comments for the public meeting, or if the MAC member is going to be absent from the public full MAC meeting, they will certainly have the opportunity to submit their comments in writing for presentation at the full MAC meeting. Does that clarify, Leo?
I think yes, I think it does. I mean, we need to just follow the rules of the Brown Act, even when we think they're silly.
All right. I'd like to entertain a motion to advise the full MAC board that we've been presented the item regarding the Guernewood Park item, and for the record have electronically documented committee member and public comments. May we have a motion for that, please?
So moved.
Moved by Joe. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Seconded by Lisa.
No, that's Patty.
Oh, Patty, I'm sorry, Patty. All right, I was looking at my my notes here and I didn't catch the right individual. I apologize for that.
No worries. You can call
Alright.
me Lisa anytime.
Okay, Debbie, would you do a roll call vote, please?
Chair Mike Nichols,
Yes.
Joe Rogoff,
Yes.
Lisa Numenson,
Yes.
and Patty Thayer.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Very good. Thank you very much. Our next item is the overview of the housing element. And Scott Orr from Permit Sonoma Planning Department is going to be here to present the housing element draft environmental impact report, which can, or excuse me, let me start that again. Scott is here to represent Permit Sonoma, and the housing element draft EIR or environmental impact report can be viewed online on the housing element update webpage linked in the agenda. And this is a 600-page document, so it requires a lot of time to go through it and review it. It provides an opportunity for county residents to examine and comment on the draft EIR during the 45-day public comment period. Written comments must be submitted by 11:59 p.m. on February 13th, 2023. While we will be taking public comment today, I personally encourage the public to submit written comments, which can be sent via email to permitsonoma-housing@sonomacounty.org or by regular mail to Permit Sonoma. Attention, Eric Gage, 2550 Ventura Avenue, Santa Rosa, California, 95403. Written comments will be included in the public record for the draft EIR. And as I understand, will require acknowledgement of receipt by Permit Sonoma. So it's really important that the written documentation be submitted so that it can be included in the document. So with that, I'd like to open it up first off for committee members, and then we'll follow that up with public comment. So with committee members, let's start off with Joe. Do you have comments on the draft EIR for the housing element?
I do. Again, I've heard from many neighbors, as have you, and you know, there are some very common concerns, and I'd like to make sure that some of those are brought up here today. The four that will need rezoning have been really controversial, and they face a lot of opposition from the neighbors. The major concerns are around infrastructure. All around very narrow roads, 1.5 lane roads for cut and lock sites, a 1-lane road going up a very steep hill with very short switchbacks on the Sunset site. This is a great concern during construction with all the trucks needed. Take it from me, I ran into 2 in viewing the Sunset site and had to back up. And then for the big increase in population and vehicle usage after construction, for emergency evacuations, for floods and wildfires, and for children walking to bus stops or to Guerneville School with no sidewalks. I wonder, and they wonder, are these things taken into consideration during site selection? Should I just keep going and stack it up? And
Yeah, why don't you complete your comments, and then we can. I have to also read Herman Hernandez's comments into the record as well. So
there are also many concerns that one Laughlin site is partially in the floodplain, and that all have current issues with sewage and water supply. The question raised is, if these sites are eventually chosen, rezoned, and sold at some point for development, are there requirements for upgrades? Similar to Lisa's comment earlier. Another comment for neighbors is the enormous change that this housing would mean for their neighborhood. For example, the Cut and Court project would add 107 people to a circle with about 20 homes. I think only about 10 of them are full-time occupied. Not about being a NIMBY, but these folks bought homes in an intentionally small and isolated neighborhood. Is that considered when selecting sites? The enormous change it would affect on the community. And then the other thing is, again, today, I believe we're talking about CEQA, the Environmental Impact Report, and not the entirety of the project. What is the proper way for residents and community members to comment on the project as a whole? It looks from the timeline that the board is going to vote approval in April. So how and when can community continue to have their opinions heard? And that ends my comments.
thank you, Joe. And for the record, Herman Hernandez asked that I read his comments into the record. He was unable to make the meeting this evening. And he says, and I quote, "I am submitting my objection to the rezoning of the properties listed in the Sonoma County Draft EIR report, specifically GUE 1, which is at 14156 Sunset Avenue, GUE 2, which is at 16450 Laughlin Road, GUE 3 at 16500 Cutton Court, and GUE 4, which is at 16050 Laughlin Road, all in Guerneville." And his comments follow. With the Sunset Avenue property, it's located above the Guerneville Library and off Woodland Avenue. In several areas, only a single car accesses Woodland is a narrow county roadway. As you approach the top of Woodland, you take a right turn to Sunset, which is a ridge top with about 12 homes currently in the neighborhood, and a little wider street as you drive about 2 blocks. Then you hit a roadway that is a dead end where you come to the subject property, which consists of about 1.3 acres of land at the end of a mini country road. In order to exit the property, you then go down Sunset Avenue to Morningside Drive to Palo Alto, and the road is single car access all the way down the hill. As I described the ride going to the subject property, as I mentioned several times above, the residents need to be very careful about going up and down the road. I feel the infrastructure, water, sewer, and other utilities are major issues and even not possible. Plus, when we speak about evacuation from fire, would be a major problem. If there were more housing built in the neighborhood, the addition of more residents would be a major concern. For the current location of this parcel, I would totally be against the parcel being rezoned. Number 2, 16,500 Cutton Court is a very light used road, plus currently has single family dwelling on the land and sits on a level ridgetop parcel with great views. To get to this site, you have to turn left on Armstrong Woods Road onto Laughlin, a country road where 2 cars passing each other can be a little tight. And then you drive up Cutton Drive, where some of the road only has access for 1 car. As you get to the ridgetop, there are about 18 homes in the neighborhood. And as you drive west on Cutton Drive, again, is narrow in some parts until you get to the subject property. Based on the location, plus the infrastructure requirements, access, and the possible evacuation, I find this property unsuitable for rezoning. Number 3, 16,050 Laughlin Road is located right off Armstrong Woods Road. In fact, it is the second property right off of Armstrong. Please note that the 16,500 Cutton Road access to that property is the same road, or Laughlin Road, where currently this road is used for access to enter the Guerneville Elementary School, which has 290 students, and the school buses and parents bring children to the school, which already creates during the day heavy traffic. In addition, Laughlin Road is an access artery for about 200 homes that already use Laughlin, plus the school parents, and that is a lot of traffic. Now you consider rezoning Cutton and the subject property here with a possible 150 units. It just does not seem feasible. This property does consist of 5 acres and borders Fife Creek, which makes a good portion of the property in the 100-year flood zone. Plus, on the one parcel has access off of Laughlin Road, which would really cause and increase a traffic issue if they only have 1 exit option. I would be against any current rezoning of this parcel, yet I feel you maybe could place some homes on this land, but nothing for what is being considered, to the level of which is being considered. So traffic, infrastructure, flood, and major issues. In addition, I have seen the current land takes much of the high water when there is possible flooding. And number 4, which is 16450 Laughlin Road, again, access to this property. You're coming in from Armstrong Woods onto Laughlin and driving about 3/4 of a mile to the property, which again consists of some portions of Laughlin with only 1 car passing in these areas of the road. Meaning that 1 car needs to wait as the other car passes by. Again, we are using a road to get to this property, and about 1/4 mile before arriving at the property, is the second property being proposed, and the third is closer to Armstrong Woods Road. What is surprising is the rezoning the county is calling for is proposing some 200+ units, doubling the residents in a neighborhood that its current residents are always careful on driving on these roads. I'm also against the rezoning of this parcel for the reasons of infrastructure, flooding, traffic, and overpopulating the Armstrong Valley. The parcels do not pan out with the problems of the road and even the possibility of water and the connections of sewer. I have lived in Guerneville for 53 years and have been a real estate broker for 50 years. In that time, I have seen many changes and needs. Yet, this proposal of rezoning produced by PRMD is scary for the community. And truly, we do need affordable housing, but sorry to say, the locations marked just at this time will not work. When you have them all on the north side of Guerneville, all having 1-car lanes. In closing, if you have questions for me, please feel to contact me. And that concludes the comments by committee member Hernandez. So next person for comment would be Lisa Namonson.
Thanks, Mike. I'm looking at the website and it says that the comments are due by 5 p.m. on February 13th. I just wanted to clarify, is it 11:59 p.m. or 5 p.m.?
Scott, can you clarify that?
It is 5 p.m.
Okay.
I'm sorry for the
Right.
typo on my.
No, that's okay. Some of us like to wait until the last minute. So the last minute is 5 p.m. And I want to encourage everyone to write in. I've been on it to the FPA meeting, which is Forestville Planning Association, where all this infrastructure issues were discussed. I've listened to the Planning Commission hearing and heard some Forestvilleans state their issues, including Vesta, who unfortunately I know can't speak on this issue tonight. And I just wanted to say that I echo, the infrastructure sentiments, but I really want to hear from everyone who's tuned in tonight and be able to hear all of their comments and then maybe be able to reserve time for anything that's left over, because there's been enough talk on Nextdoor and Facebook. Dan Northern wrote in a very informed letter to the community. So I'll kind of hold back and say anything that doesn't get mentioned, but I see there's a lot of people who probably want to speak to us. So I'll just stop there and let the next person talk for now. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much. Moving on to member Thayer, comments.
Thank you, Lisa, and I agree with you on that. So I'll be very, very short. I want to hear from the public as well. But I think a little consistent with what I said before, we just had our first meeting on this governance study of the Lower Russian River, where I believe that current services regarding road repair, or God forbid, we might actually have some roads that aren't one lane, sewer, water, public transportation. All of these things, I believe, will come out of that study showing that for our current population, we are in great need of more assistance from the county. And if we're moving forward with a housing element that says, oh, bring in 1,652 people into Forestville and 666 into Guerneville, without first having that report that says we are already behind the 8 ball on delivering services for this community, bringing all these people, and there's Grayton as well. I'm sorry, I don't mean to overlook Grayton. I just fear there are too many sort of independent things. I want to build here, and governance study without taking into account each other's findings before making a final decision about what we can sustain. I'm hearing the same things from the people I talked to that Lisa and Joe mentioned. I'm not hearing opposition per se to participating in the housing element, because of course we must all acknowledge the need, and we do, for more housing. But how these particular parcels are selected in an area that's flood prone, just terrible sewer and septic problems. We don't have cell phone. We don't have, a lot of the time we don't have, everybody wants to make sure that somebody has taken that into account. And when you read through the EIR, and I know we're just talking about the EIR right now, it doesn't pay much heed to that. It does talk about appropriately, water and animals and that sort of thing, but the infrastructure issues just really don't jump out at you. I haven't read it all, okay? Doesn't jump out from the summary. So that's my comment, and then I'd be really, really ears open to what the public wants to add to all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. And my comments, basically, I read through the draft EIR as best I could. I'm not a planner by any stretch of the imagination, but one thing I did not see is whether or not our fragile PG&E grid in West County is adequate to take care and supply energy to the additional residents that the draft EIR is proposing. We had a situation a year ago in January where one power pole was struck on Trenton Road, which knocked out 2,600 ratepayers for up to 24 hours. And those ratepayers included people in the village or community of Forestville, Rio Nito, Guerneville, Cazadero, Jenner, and Bodega Bay. And quite frankly, with one pole going out and that affecting that many people, I'm really concerned about our potential for not being able to supply energy in a safe and efficient manner to the additional households. I drove today. I didn't have time to get to Forestville, but I did drive to each of the parcels in Guerneville that Mr. Hernandez and Mr. Rogoff have discussed. And quite frankly, I was shocked beyond belief that those particular parcels were selected because of the infrastructure issues, specifically the roads. I mean, we're concerned about building a hotel on Highway 116, and yet we're looking at packing in 200 people on a little tiny road that's 18 feet wide. It just doesn't seem to make a heck of a lot of sense to me. So with that being said, I think it's time to open this for public comment. And again, I respect the public and we want to hear from you, but I really urge that you place your comments in writing and submit them to Permit Sonoma, and we'll have that address up again for you so that you can do that. Yes, Patty, before we move on forward, go ahead.
Yeah, I do believe that I heard that things submitted will have to be responded to. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I mean, submitted in writing.
Yes.
Thank you.
All righty, Debbie, we can open this up for public comment.
Okay, yes, at this time, I would like to invite any members of the public who wish to comment on this item to raise their hand, and I will check my inbox for written comments. There are no written comments. So I would like to recognize attendee Robert Grandmason. I will now allow you to talk, and please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, committee members. My name is Robert Grandmaison. I live on Sunset Avenue. If you stand at my property, you can throw a rock easily across the road and hit GUE 1 site. So I'm intimately familiar with that particular location. I went out there today, 18 feet, by the way, Mike Nicholls, is generous. There was only about 9.5 feet of pavement in front of my house where this property is, just so you're aware. It broadens to maybe 15 feet, but nowhere in that area does it get more than 15 feet.
Right.
I travel that road daily. I can tell you, I have countless times had to put my car in reverse to allow Sweetwater Springs trucks to access the site, which they must do because there are 2 extremely large water tanks that provide Guerneville all of its potable and firefighting water. If you remove that from the site, you remove the ability for us to fight wildfires or house fires or anything like that in the area, as well as remove our drinking water. So keep that in mind. Another thing is Sweetwater, and I've spoken with them, have sent information to the different committees without much response from them. They actually are planning on expanding their facilities in the future. So they need even more area to work their magic in. The roadways here are narrow. There are steep terrain on both sides of the roadways. If any of you who've traveled up here can see, so it would make it very difficult to widen the roads, let alone provide sidewalks. There's a 190-foot distance in elevation from the bottom of the hill to the top. Try doing that in a wheelchair or a walker with canes or with small children on a dry day, let alone a rainy day when timbers are falling in the road. 1 day without power is not so bad. On January 5th, a power line went out in front of my house. This neighborhood was without power for 5 days. Imagine that if you're a community of 78 people living together in one area. So I totally object to the GUE1 site for that and other reasons as well. Additionally, the DEIR is incorrect in the photo they show. That is nowhere near the site.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate your comments. Debbie, next.
Next speaker is Krista.
Hi there, can you hear me?
We certainly can. Go ahead, Krista.
Hi, thank you. Okay. So similar to a question that Joe posed at the beginning, I'm curious how these sites were chosen for West County. Were representatives of Forestville a part of the group that proposed these sites? I've been told that for private property, owners had to volunteer their properties. So was the housing element advertised to homeowners somehow? And while I personally agree that we need more housing, the sites chosen in my hometown of Forestville for medium density, medium high density housing seems nonsensical. So who is in charge of this? How were these sites chosen in our hometowns? And did my hometown of Forestville have representation to bring up some of the challenges we're all aware of regarding those chosen sites? Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. Scott, can you respond to that question?
I figured I'd respond to all the questions after.
Very
public
good.
comment.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Next public comment, Debbie?
The next public comment is Tony. Can you please unmute?
Hello, I should be unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you for letting me speak and opening everything up to the public. I spoke at the planning commission as well, and I've read the 600 pages. I've gone through and analyzed quite a bit of it, trying to make sense of how is this an analysis when there's no alternatives or there's not a lot of commentary. It seems to be very factual in its attempt to represent the areas. And I live up on the Cut and Drive property, and again, very confused on the Cut and Drive selection as well as the Laughlin, given all the things that everyone's talking about. But I actually tracked that back to a housing element plan from 2014, and you can go back and look at this, and you just see this dot north of town, a mile and a half away, which again, if you think about walking there, it's going to be a car-driven society. Excuse me, increase of population for us is going to be 200% in that quarter-mile area. Whereas we're looking at overall the plans for the housing element are much smaller percentages for everybody else. But again, it's a really, really tight area in many ways. I ride a bike, so back to this safety element, having no sidewalks, even going up Cutting, it sounds like folks who don't live here have been up there. I've literally pulled over to let trucks go by, and then still I got pushed into the bushes by delivery trucks. So could you imagine another 100 and something people getting deliveries every day, from Amazon, so on and so forth. So definitely have a concern around those pieces, but I also feel like the other aspects of the environmental report, I'm not sure where they go in the planning, but again, it does seem odd to select over so many other sites that look like there's large tracts of lands along Laughlin, whatever it may be. But we were without power for 6 days recently. And we also have water issues. If you look in the environmental report, it shows that we have 2-inch PVC water pipes and a 6-inch service, whereas many other people have much, much larger in the other areas. So it seems just inappropriate. And I feel like the timing of the state's requirements is really just going to push this to make it a foregone conclusion for some property that was supposedly nominated in 2014, but is stuck there almost out of convenience. So again, I hope that they reconsider the site.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate your comments. Next, Debbie.
Okay, yes, our next commenter is Bryce. I will please unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, can you hear me?
We sure can, Bryce. Go ahead.
Okay, great. I've got 2 comments. First up is the concern around the distribution of new housing units across the county by ABAG. So statewide, California is increasing housing by 9%. The mandate for Sonoma County is about 8.4%. The mandate for Santa Rosa is 7.5%. And strangely, the mandate for unincorporated Sonoma is also 7.5%. The rural areas of Sonoma are being loaded up at the same level as Santa Rosa. So this defies common sense and defies basic urban planning logic. And as Linda Hopkins noted in her February 1, 2023 newsletter, this load on West County has increased an outrageous 654% in this planning cycle. So my question is, what has Sonoma County done to push back against ABAG? And what is still open for that pushback? What can either the county or the people do to push back on those assignments from ABAG? My second concern is about the unincorporated parts of Sonoma, and these are local decisions. So if we consider that California increase is 9%, Sonoma County is 8.4%, unincorporated Sonoma is 7.5%, Santa Rosa is 8.5%. But if we look at the local cities in West County, Guerneville expansion is 40%, Grayton expansion is 70%, Forestville expansion is 110% in this planning cycle. So I want to know, in the absence of major infrastructure improvements, how do Sonoma County planners expect these tiny towns to absorb 40 to 110% more people? Thank you.
I had one quick question, Bryce. You said Guerneville was 40, Forestville was 120, and I missed Grayton.
70%.
70. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and those numbers are based on the number of units multiplied by the average household size in California.
Very good. I appreciate that. Thank you. Debbie, next
Thank
comment.
you. And I think that did Tony just speak, or is your hand?
Tony spoke.
Tony spoke,
minute ago.
okay. And so I do not see any more hands raised. Let me check my email and seeing no hands raised, that concludes the public comment on this item.
We're good. And I appreciate.
Oh, no, that's another MAC member.
Okay.
We have a MAC.
I appreciate all the public comments, and Robert, Krista, Tony, Bryce, I encourage you to forward your comments in writing to the address. We'll post it again up on the screen for you. It's really, really important that you place your comments in writing and submit them so that they become part of the draft EIR. So with that, Scott, I'd like to invite you to comment on some of the comments that were presented this evening.
Yeah, I'll do my best to hit most of them. You know, if I was looking away from the camera, it's because I was furiously writing. And so for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Scott Orm, the Deputy Director of Planning at Permit Sonoma. So many of the names on this meeting look familiar from recent Planning Commission meetings over the years and other public comment letters. So happy to be here on your turf rather than having you in a meeting I'm facilitating. So I'm gonna go kind of in backwards order, I think, starting with some of Bryce's comments in regards to what did the county do to push back. So the county actually appealed our arena allocation to ABAG, saying, you know, we fundamentally disagree with the methodology that resulted in these numbers. And, you know, citing our community separators, urban growth boundaries, the county's commitment to city-centered growth, just general, land use principles of, focusing the numbers within cities because cities have utilities and all that. So our appeal was denied. And that was, a final action. So after that appeal was denied, we are, the county is an extension of state government. So it was at this point, our obligation under law as the county is to go with the number that exists. We did talk with a number of local jurisdictions, Santa Rosa, Cloverdale, the other cities about potentially taking some of our numbers into their cities where they have services and to come to some kind of agreement, but only Cloverdale was willing to take some of our countywide numbers. So they took about 50 units, which is small, but that's one of the sites, could be 50 units. So we were tasked with, coming up with the difference. And, there's a lot of mention of sites like Guerneville 1 and Guerneville 3, but they've actually been in the housing inventory since 2014 in the last housing element that was approved. And, I think that they're a great case study of what, is likely to happen with a lot of these sites, which is nothing. So all of those sites were identified as potential for housing as part of the last housing element, because they met certain criteria, particularly size and in an area that was in an urban service area. So one thing that's important to remember for this housing element process, it's a planning process where we do our best to consider the environmental impacts of what might it be like if housing was here, and the state requires us to keep an inventory to meet and exceed our housing allocation, because sometimes things happen and properties may get subdivided or sold or turned into something else. So we always have to have a little bit of a buffer in case sites fall out over the years. But then we have sites like Guerneville 1 and 3 where they were identified almost a decade ago and nothing has happened, and there's a good chance that continues. Ultimately it's up to the landowner, and development is ridiculously expensive. So in terms of how do we manage, or what do planners expect in regards to growth when the infrastructure is poor? Well, the first thing that we would expect when someone proposes a development is they need to put in infrastructure. So if there's a bad road and someone wants to put in a housing development, at a certain scale, the county has to do what's called design review. Sometimes we might have to do a use permit, which would be the same type of permit, a winery needs to operate, same kind of process of going to the planning commission or board of zoning adjustments. Most housing projects have design review, which is where we check on any impacts that weren't considered previously. And then we apply what we are told are far too many conditions of approval to those projects to make sure that impacts are mitigated, that it's environmentally responsible, and that the things that are necessary for public health and safety, sidewalk, water, access, that those things are put in before any housing is constructed. And it's kind of a chicken or the egg scenario where areas with a lack of utilities, access, public transit, those things are typically held up by population. If the population isn't high enough, it doesn't pencil out for whoever's operating the transit system to add a new stop or things like that. So we get into these situations where we're talking about housing, and rightfully so, people talk about the existing infrastructure. And part of the reason the infrastructure is like that is because no one has tried to do anything in recent times where they would have been required by the county to upgrade that infrastructure. So Tony mentioned that 2014 plan. So the last time we had to update the housing element was 2014. So it's, it used to be on an 8-year cycle. It's transitioned to a 5-year cycle. Usually with most general plan elements, there's no real timeline. Most progressive planning shops will update it or try to update it every 20 years or so, because we like any discipline, we learn things over time. And if we were still implementing land use like we had in the 1950s, that doesn't really look like what a lot of us want in terms of responding to things like climate change, or just, I mean, CEQA didn't even exist in the 1950s, for example. So that's why we try to get in and update the plans pretty often. Some of you may have even participated in the local coastal plan update, which was 21 years in the making for that update. So we try to get in on these plans, every so often to make sure that we're applying the most recent methodologies, science, and things like that. To Krista, who asked, how are these sites chosen? How is this advertised? So back in, I believe it was 2019, there was the rezoning sites for housing initiative where the county put out a call for people to identify additional sites that weren't on our radar that could possibly meet criteria for housing. And then we went, the 50 or so sites that was a result of that was after weeding out a bunch of things that were in community separators, or didn't have any water at all, or maybe didn't even have a road going to the property. So what we were left with were ones where it seemed like, yes, we can at least start looking at these critically and determine whether or not they make sense to potentially rezone and include in our inventory. So that's a completely separate process to, as part of normally updating the housing element, the state requires us to keep an inventory to meet those RENA numbers. So it's kind of a little bit of both was how we ended up with what we have. But again, back to Guerneville 1 and 2, just because something's on the sites and a housing element is approved doesn't mean that something is going to happen. To Robert, who's lives on Sunset, I think I covered Guernewood 1 pretty well. But the examples of Sweetwater Springs wanting to expand, the firefighting water or drinking water in general, through the process of design review, building permits, encroachment permits, to do work in roads, bring it up to modern standards, utilities, all of that goes into whether or not a housing development gets built. And there's, if the general plan draft EIR seems long, it's nothing in comparison to all the pages of code, whether it's grading or building or plumbing or any number of things that we as county staff look at as we're seeing these projects. So although there is an environmental review now, there's a lot of other things along the way between when something is a conceptual design in a matrix and when someone is ready, a person is ready to move into that house. I think that most of us, when we move into a new residence, particularly if we're renting, we almost take it for granted that it's going to be a safe place to live, that it's going to meet modern health and safety standards, and that's because a lot of people along the way ask a lot of very critical questions, and make sure that they're taken care of before anything is before even the first shovel hits the ground. Sorry, I filled up 2 pages.
Scott, I just had one redirect on that. Did the permits actually go out and physically travel these roads and look at each of the sites before they were nominated?
Yes.
Get us to
So, yes. So, well, not before they were nominated, because many of them, weren't in our inventory already, and
Correct.
we learned about them as being potential because they were nominated. That's not true for every single one of them. But yes, standard practice, if you're working on any planning project, whether it's a permit for a recycling facility at the Mirabelle Park and Ride area, or it's a large planning policy document, the expectation is that the people that are working on it know the ground truth, and so that includes going out. So And that also happens, at the planning commission level. The last meeting we had, and I know Commissioner Carr said he drove out to every single site. So, it's not just the staff that are, critically thinking about things. It's, the folks appointed by the board to, sit on the planning commission, board of zoning adjustments. And, groups like the MACs and the CACs, all of you also are, kind of thinking of things critically, and that information comes to us through things like, the comment period on the draft DIR. And so I do want to clarify one point regarding comments on this project in a few different ways. So there is that February 13th deadline for comments. And that deadline is if you want your comment specifically included in that final EIR and specifically responded to. And because at some point we have to say, okay, we've been analyzing and working on this a long time. Now it's time to this is the day where we're saying, okay, we've really got to do the final version. But people can continue to comment all the way up and through when the Board of Supervisors approves something. So after February 13th, the housing element itself still needs to go to the Planning Commission. We can accept comment all the way through that. After the Planning Commission makes a decision, you will continue to accept comment all the way through to the Board of Supervisors. And then at each of those stops, there will be, moments for public comment. And, I know that, anywhere from 90 seconds to 3 minutes goes by very quickly. And so that's why, that written format is so powerful, because it gives you time to really organize your thoughts. And you can type a lot more out in your free time than you can, verbalize in 2 minutes. A anonymous attendee had asked in chat, a property is rezoned for a certain range of units. Can the owner ever build units below the minimum number? So the minimum number is the minimum number, but they don't have to necessarily go to the maximum if it's a range. But yes, the minimum would be the minimum.
Very good.
Do we need to pause again? Because I think I'm now at the point to maybe comment on some of the panelist comments, if you want me to respond to any of those.
We had one individual that we did not allow for public comment, and she has asked to speak, and that's Vicky Miller.
Okay.
So I'd like to let her comment, and then we can circle back, Scott. All right.
Okay, thank you. I will, if you can unmute Vicky, you should be able to comment now.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. So many of my comments have been addressed already. I live on Maribel Road in Forestville, and I do have some concerns about just the number of people coming in and our infrastructure. And because we don't have sidewalks here and we have a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit on Maribel Road, it's already a bit of a dangerous endeavor to walk on the road. So again, most of my concerns have already been addressed by Kristen Bryce, but I wanted to say that I'll be submitting my comments in writing. And thanks for including me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Vicky. Appreciate your patience in waiting for us to get back to you.
No
I'm sorry
worries.
that we overlooked you before. That
worries.
sometimes happens on these electronic meetings. It's
No worries.
kind of you have to be a musician to make this thing work
No.
properly sometimes. So
At all.
yeah, thank you. All right, Scott, you wanted to address some of the comments made by committee members.
Yeah, so I think some of them have kind of been covered through other things, such as Herman Hernandez comments on a number of the Guerneville sites. Mike, you asked about, the PG&E grid with your power pole example. So as part of our process on individual projects, so, if a housing project came in and we were doing design review on it, one of the first thing we do after we check to make sure they've submitted everything that they're required to submit is we do what's called a referral, where we send a project out to, other county departments like public infrastructure to look at things like, the access, and if it's meeting, AASHTO safety standards on, visibility triangles. But we also send one to PG&E. We usually get a fairly dry response from them. Talking about, utilities and providing power and whatnot. So they do see it. We don't, it tends to be more of a boilerplate response, but that is their opportunity to let us know if there's an issue. And, it's more likely to see there being an issue over, a major industrial project or anything on a site that has, kind of high power wires. But, ultimately, new development is what spurs things like upgrades to grids and things like that. So, that gets back to that, the same concept about, mass transit. There isn't transit, so therefore we shouldn't build housing. But there's no transit because we're not building housing. And I think that has some overlap with some of Patty's comments, particularly about, needing more money for that infrastructure. And, housing has the potential to align that money in a way that can support, the area. And one of the risks that we have, if we were just to say, state, we see your number, it's too high, we're not going to do it. The state can then say, well, okay, but we're going to take away your land use authority so that you can't decide what goes anywhere until you come back into compliance. And not only that, we're not going to give you any money for anything. So it's a pretty good threat to have that looming over us. So, for us as planners, our goal is to make sure that we are, serving everyone in the county as best we can. And that's why things like, having an approved housing element are so important. In terms of, flood prone areas or areas with no cell phones, utilities, most of we have two types of flood areas in the county that are actually zones. We've got the floodplain, F2, which kicks in some additional, building code requirements. It's mostly surmountable and not too big a deal once you're consciously building to accommodate for it. And then we have the F1, which is the floodway, which ever since my planner one day is working at the front counter, I've referred to as the kiss of death, because essentially you can't put anything in there for any reason. Don't even ask. And if you do ask, you should feel bad about it. That's how strict that zoning is. So, nothing that would instantly filter something out. So anything that would be in a flood prone area, would be something that would need to be constructed specifically to mitigate those effects, so that, and including things like that property may be fine, but it's pushing water into surrounding areas. That's no better. So that's another thing we look at. In regards to cell phones, some of the most contentious projects we have are telecom towers. I remember one getting denied, I think on the B of A property in Guerneville. So that's another one of those things where, we always want to be connected everywhere, but we don't want, the telecom towers in a way that we want it kind of out of sight. So those are always a challenge, for me as just as a planner, is, trying to weigh that trade-off, particularly when we have, the public safety side of the community being like, put them in everywhere. And, so trying to support, both ends of that. we get very flexible, but it's tough. Someone mentioned that it looks like not someone, I believe it was Joe mentioned that this is going to the board in April. At the moment, it's listed on the board calendar for May. But I think there's a good chance that it's going to slip back later than that. We were hoping that we might receive state comments on our work product before the very last day that they were legally allowed to, but it's not looking like that's going to happen. So that's probably going to extend the timeline a little bit, which, you know, is understandable. Everybody likes to, you know, get their full amount of time. Like Lisa, you know, commented on the M&D for the earlier one. You know, you want that time. So cut and cord, Joe mentioned cut and cord. I think I covered that with my Guernewood 1 and 3 comments. And then in terms of infrastructure requirements, yes, those are required. So, you know, I think for me, you know, my biggest question, and, you know, I've talked with a lot of people all over the county on this, and, you know, it's always, all of the sites are bad, but, you know, I'm really interested in, okay, so, you know, if those sites are bad, you know, how should we, you know, where should we be providing housing within these communities that is, you know, respectful of what exists, responds to, you know, the infrastructure that's there, so that, you know, we can meet our state requirements, and while also, you know, putting housing somewhere. So, you know, that's I think the hard question. You know, I don't have an answer for that. You know, what we have in the housing element was, you know, us doing our best to, you know, kind of balance all of those needs. And even then, you know, we know that most of the sites are going to take a long time to potentially turn into anything, if they even do. But, you know, we're, you know, for me personally, I just want to say, so I grew up in Palo Alto. So I grew up in a place where it was affordable when I was 6, and then it became a place where there was no way that myself or my sisters could ever live. So, you know, all of the family moved away. And so I have a special place for me as, you know, a land use planner, where, you know, I want people to live in the community that they grew up in. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of places in Sonoma County where that is slipping. And, you know, for example, you know, El Molino High School closing because there aren't enough kids, you know, that's because families are getting pushed out. You know, as we look at responding to climate change, you know, we're at the same time, while we're getting, you know, told to build more housing by the state, we're being told that housing should go where people work and where there's, you know, transit, because that is the way that we, you know, start making meaningful difference on climate change. So, you know, there's all these competing things that, you know, we do end up in a situation where we don't have, you know, perfect sites and perfect solutions. But we still have to, you know, as planners, we do the best we can to kind of try to balance it out and make sure that, you know, we're, you know, communities are maintained, but also allowed to grow and welcome in new people who, you know, may not even be old enough to live on their own yet, but they're coming. So I know that last bit was a little bit of an editorial, but I'm happy to take any thoughts or comments.
Thank you. I think Patty, you did have a comment that you wanted to redirect.
Just a question. I'll be very brief. And I thank you so much for those comments, Scott. My heart is where your heart is. But I'm a little bit worried, and I don't understand the consequence. If the plan as it exists now, gets approved. And then, as we've seen since 2014, builders look at these sites and go, are you kidding me? There is so much that would have to be done before we even start to build an apartment building. You know, that's just not, I'm not there. Would we face the same draconian, you know, impacts as you outlined before? That's number one. And number two, you asked, well, if these aren't great, and I think you're hearing from people, not that we don't want to expand housing, we don't want to have affordable housing. I don't hear anybody saying that. They're saying these sites are fraught with difficulties. And you have asked for, should we be providing different places? What would be the mechanism at this late stage to do that? Thank you.
So to the first point of would we be subject to the same draconian thing? I don't think that things are going to get less draconian if the situation keeps getting worse statewide. So, you know, our focus is really on, you know, if the state puts out an obligation that we, you know, meet it head on and, you know, continue to work with, you know, communities as we, you know, go through this housing element update every 5 years of, you know, if something has been on the inventory for a while and it's not moving, probably shouldn't continue to be on the inventory. And that's when we start to look for, you know, what makes sense to go in its place. Because, you know, it's, if we, you know, take out 100 units, well, we need to find 100 units to put back in so that we are, you know, avoiding that draconian aspect. And in terms of, you know, kind of the what's next and at this stage of the game, our focus on the county side is just getting into compliance as soon as possible so that, you know, we aren't in a situation where people can come in and just build whatever they want, regardless of what the zoning is, whether it's, you know, commercial or residential, regardless. You know, we're trying to avoid that, understandably. But, you know, to me, that, you know, every single planning project that I work on, you know, I meet new members of the community, and, you know, I try to impart that, you know, we are not going away, and there's going to be continuous progress in multiple different, you know, planning initiatives, and staying engaged and talking with us is, I think, how, you know, each plan is better than the last. And so, you know, as we, you know, move forward from this process, and you know, I imagine many of you probably didn't participate in the 2014 process, but I'm pretty sure you're going to pay attention to the next housing element update too. And you're going to, you know, remember, you know, the things that, you know, we struggled with and went through on this one. And that's going to inform, you know, some of the things that you start thinking about in terms of, you know, like, oh, like, you know, this lot's been vacant a long time. And, you know, I remember that housing element thing from a few years ago, and, you know, maybe this would be a good spot for, you know, live work duplex or something. You know, so I think that gets to both your questions. Maybe. Yes, I see enough. Great. Yeah, it's a lot.
Very good. Well, Scott, thank you so much for your
I do see Joe.
Right.
Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, speaking of desirable sites, the two in Guerneville that do not need to be rezoned have potential in my eyes. One is in the Safeway parking lot in the flea market. The other is the Ferrogas area. Curious that one is also the water district, as is the one on top of Summit. So I wondered if there was a connection. But I was curious why those are in the housing element if they don't need to be rezoned. Does anything fundamentally change about these sites because they're in the element?
You know, I think it's more that, you know, as the housing crisis has, you know, grown more acute over the last decade, while also, you know, building has gotten more efficient and road standards have been, you know, also beefed up to where, once we start applying all of those things, it's like, okay, well, we actually use less water in current construction than we did on old. And, maybe, with more people, the environmental impact is actually less. I know we do get into things like traffic, but this applies to some of the sites, but not all. I'll admit that. But when we put housing near where people want to work and there's amenities like food, we find that they don't get in their car. They walk, and that's so. It's not always true that just because we're increasing the number of people that live in a certain area, that it directly translates to traffic in the negative connotation.
Joe, does that satisfy your question?
Yeah.
Thank you. Lisa, did you have one final?
Just to say that, like, for example, it wasn't a Forestville example, but Robert's example in Guerneville, one of a photo being incorrect. It's my understanding that this granular knowledge, so in the Forestville, the 6 Forestville sites, local granular knowledge of roads, fire, sewer, water, things that are not sort of depicted correctly in the draft EIR. It's important for everyone to write in their comments. These comments will have an impact. The commissioners will read your comments. And again, this engagement in the process, it's not too late to engage in the process. And again, for example, Bryce, with his statistics of the increase in Forestville's population by 120% versus statewide between 7 and 9%. All of these factors impact community, and only community members know how they'll be impacted. And it's this local knowledge that's really important. So send in those comments, everyone. I encourage you.
Very good. Does that conclude the comments from our committee members? Okay. Again, Scott, I want to thank you very much for your participation this evening, and you open up a bunch of new vistas for me that I did not understand before, and I truly appreciate you walking us through the process. So,
and just one maybe closing comment. I really want to thank you for hosting me, and Leo for reaching out to ask me to join. This was a new experience for me, getting to come to your meeting. So really, I just want to say thank you. And also, the county has a lot of people that are teleworking. I tend to be at the office every day. I love coffee, and so feel free to reach out. You think that I'm not being serious, but I really am. I've met with a number of people over at Pete's Coffee and just gotten to talk, land use planning. Even when we're not, faced with a certain deadline, it's nice to be able to, further those connections. So open invitation. Thanks again, Mike.
Scott, one quick confirmation. You mentioned that even after February 13th at 5 o'clock, you can still respond to the housing element, just they won't be included in the draft EIR cutoff for response to that particular document.
Right.
Is it the same address that we can continue to share the permit Sonoma-housing at sonoma-county.org? Is that going to be valid for the entire housing element process?
Yeah, that's a email address that's likely to be in use until, we don't use email anymore, if that ever happens. It's a pretty good one.
very good. All right. What I'd like to do then is now that we've had public comment, and we tried to reach out to everyone during the public comment period before we brought it back to the committee members. So if there was anyone that had a second thought about something, I would really urge you to write to the address that we've discussed several times this evening, and Debbie will post it again. But please submit your comments to the permit sonoma-housing@sonomacounty.org address. And appreciate that. So what I want to do is at this time move on to some closing comments. And first off, would like to entertain a motion to advise the full MAC board that we have been presented with the housing element item, and for the record have documented committee member and public comments.
I so move.
May I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Joe. Moved by Patty and seconded by Joe. May we have a roll call vote, please, on this item?
Chair Mike Nicholls,
Yes.
Joe Rogoff,
Yes.
Lisa Nominson,
Yes.
and Patty Thayer.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And closing comments, the regular MAC meeting schedule is going to change in March. So the regular MAC meeting will be on the second Thursday of the month, effective in March. And the River MAC will be meeting on a monthly basis, effective March. Land Use Committee meeting is going to be the Tuesday prior to the full MAC on the opposite location of the river to coast, which would be the first Tuesday of the month in April, June, August, October, and December. And I want to thank the participants for their comments and the committee members for their input on the matters before the Land Use Committee meeting this evening. At this point, I would like to call for a motion for adjournment. I have a motion to adjourn the meeting, please.
Sure, Mike. I'll make the motion. So we don't meet next week, our MAC. Or we do?
MAC, no, this is effective in March when they,
Okay,
we do meet next week.
okay. I thought so.
Yes,
Just
yeah.
wanted to be clear on that. Okay,
Right, I
thank
wanna
you.
be
Yep,
sure
then
that-
yeah,
It's effective in March when the meeting dates change.
okay. And I will then move to adjourn.
May we have a second, please?
I'll second.
And it's been seconded by Joe. Thank you very much. We have a roll call vote and then we'll close the meeting.
Chair Mike Nicholls,
Yes.
Joe Rogoff,
Yes.
Lisa Nominson,
Yes.
and Patty Thayer.
Yes.
Motion is passed unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone. And again, thank you for the public for your patience and your comments. And it was a learning experience for us. And we will move forward now for the next week for the full MAC meeting. And we will again, sure, discuss this item at that time. Thank you again. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.